You have the data, you have the charts, you deliver the evidence-based presentation, and yet the audience leans back and politely declines. In most high-stakes environments, pushing harder is the most common response to failure. This approach relies on fuel, the use of incentives, data, and external pressure to elevate an idea's appeal. It assumes that if the pitch is attractive enough, the resistance will vanish. But the biology of choice suggests otherwise. When people feel their autonomy is being limited by an outside force, they trigger a state called reactance. It is the reflexive instinct to protect one's own freedom of choice. This creates a cycle where the harder the presenter pushes, the more defensive the audience becomes. They remain entirely outside the realization, looking for reasons to doubt the messenger. The mechanism of change doesn't depend on how well the evidence is presented, but on where the evidence originates. To see how that shift happens, we have to look at how a specific obstacle was solved a century ago. In the 1920s, the automotive industry faced a specific hurdle: selling newly invented laminated safety glass. It was a necessary safety feature, but it was expensive and unexciting. Salesmen were pitching to professional buyers who were experts at letting a sales pitch die against the wall without leaving a mark. Traditional persuasion tactics were failing because they felt like a restriction of the buyer's freedom. Turning a skeptic into a believer required moving them from the audience and into the process itself. In the first year of the product's release, the strategy was simple. A salesman would place the windshield on a desk and tell the buyer that the glass was safer and would not shatter. Facts enter the ear, but they are fleeting. They are easily overridden by the buyer's existing skepticism or competing data from other vendors. The buyer hears the claim, but they process it as a performance. They are looking for flaws in the presentation rather than evaluating the merits of the glass. This is a transactional interaction. It builds no connection to the product, because the customer remains entirely outside the discovery. Relying on verbal claims is an attempt to use the salesman's word to overpower the buyer's natural defenses. It rarely succeeds. Stating the facts provides the necessary context, but words alone lack the weight to move a professional skeptic. By the second year, the approach evolved. Salesmen realized that a claim that is heard can be doubted, while a truth that is witnessed becomes evidence. They began demonstrating the glass's durability. They would strike the windshield with a hammer or fire a weapon at it to show the laminated layers held the shards in place. The demonstration provided the visual proof that earlier verbal claims lacked. When the eyes see the glass remain intact, the brain begins to accept the safety benefits. The resistance starts to soften. However, even with this proof, a barrier remained. The customer was still a spectator, watching a demonstration performed by someone else. The salesman was still providing the fuel. He was the one doing the work and providing the energy to make the product look attractive. Demonstration changes minds, but it does not create a sense of ownership. The buyer is convinced that the glass works for the salesman, but they haven't experienced it for themselves. In the third year, the interaction was restructured to move beyond performance and toward experience. The salesman would walk into the office and place the windshield on the desk. He lifted a heavy steel hammer, pulling it back as if to strike the glass, but then he stopped. He would turn the hammer around, hand it to the buyer, and invite them to strike the windshield themselves. This shift utilizes a psychological principle where people are most influenced by the evidence they generate themselves. When the buyer grips the hammer and swings, they are no longer a critic evaluating a pitch. They are an active participant in a discovery. Handing over the tool bypasses reactance because the buyer is the one in control of the outcome. They cannot push back against the evidence because they are the one creating it. The buyer witnesses the result of their own strength. They become the author of the proof. The interaction succeeds because the buyer is no longer defending their skepticism. They are now connecting with their own experience. This historical success is built on a sequence that can be replicated in any environment. It requires a specific architectural order. We can map this process through a framework of sequential steps. First, the claim must be established verbally, so the brain is primed to look for a specific pattern or benefit. Next, a baseline of visual evidence must be demonstrated. This ensures the audience feels secure enough to eventually participate. Finally, the agency is handed over. The customer takes the tool, and the realization becomes their own. If you skip the earlier steps and try to force participation immediately, you create confusion. The audience needs to know what they are looking for and why it is safe to engage. Effective change is a matter of following the correct sequence, ensuring each step builds the foundation for the next. The lessons from a 1920s showroom apply to modern sales, marketing, and leadership. The tools have changed, but the human desire for autonomy has not. Persuasion is not about cornering the mind with data. It is about allowing the listener to reach the conclusion through their own participation. When the tool changes hands, the buyer becomes the owner of the story. Instead of presenting what you can do, find the metaphorical hammer in your own environment. It could be a raw dataset they can analyze, a prototype they can test, or a strategic decision they are empowered to make. Put that tool in the client's hands. Allow them to take the swing and prove the claim for themselves. Because an idea only truly lives and breathes when the audience is finally given the freedom to own it. The most effective way to address resistance is to provide the tool that allows the other person to dismantle it themselves.